In this video, we're going to write percents, decimals, and fractions with grids and learn how to transform numbers from one representation to another. So, let's read the directions. Shade the indicated quantity and rewrite in the indicated forms. Write the fraction with a denominator of 100 and also a simplified fraction when appropriate. So this is a decimal grid. It's a 10 by 10 decimal grid, and there's 100 small equally sized squares. So this is good for decimals since each square is 1 over 100, which is equivalent to 1%. As a decimal, one square would be 0.01. So we can use this connection to represent a percent and then fill in these different values. So 57 hundredths, I'm going to use the highlighter. Use orange to shade a column. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 tenths in 57 hundredths, or this is 50 hundredths. Those two values are equivalent. And then I'm going to use yellow for the hundredths that don't fill up a whole tenth. So 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay. So right now, if this is our unit, this is 1. It's broken into 100 pieces. This represents 57 hundredths. As a decimal, we write this as 0.57, 5 tenths, and 7 hundredths. As a fraction, we can write this as 57 over 100. Okay. This fraction doesn't simplify since 100's only factors are, prime factors are 2 and 5, and 57 isn't divisible by 2 or 5. And now as a percent, we would write this as 57%. Okay. So we can say 57% of this square is shaded. Let's look at the next one. 7 for every 20. So every 2 rows is 20, so I'm going to shade 7 for every, or 2 columns, excuse me, for every 2 columns. So there's the first 2 columns. I've shaded 7. There's another 7. Another, and another. So notice 2 columns, 7 shaded, 2 columns, 7 shaded, and this happens 5 times. Okay, so notice there's 7 times 5, or 35 yellow squares shaded. And each yellow square is 1/100th. Okay, so as a decimal, we would write this as 0.35. As a simplified fraction, we could actually refer to 7 for every 20. It's 7 out of 20. But now as a fraction out of 100, so we can compare it to a percent. Okay, this means 35 hundredths, okay, which is the same as 35 over 100. And as a percent, 35 hundredths means 35 per 100, or percent, which we write like this. Let's look at a few more. Now we have 6 tenths and 5 hundredths. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 full columns. I'm not going to shade this perfectly, you get the idea. And then 5 hundredths, so up to here. So our decimal representation is 0.6 tenths and 5 hundredths. Our fraction out of 100, well, this means 65 hundredths, or there's 100 small squares and 65 are shaded, so 65 out of 100. Since 65 has a factor of 5, we can simplify this. Actually, I'm just going to write this up here. So So we can divide the numerator and denominator by 5. 5 goes into 65 13 times. 5 goes into 100 20 times. So as a simplified fraction, this is 13 over 20. And as a percent, we can refer either to the decimal and say 65 hundredths is 60 per 100, 65 per 100, or 65 over 100 is 65 per 100, which is percent. Okay. Now our last one, 120 per 100. So notice there's 2 decimal grids here, and this may seem odd. How can you have more than 100%? How can you have more than 100 out of 100? But you could think of this in terms of maybe for every 100 miles your friend drives, you drive 120 miles. So you drive 120 miles per the 100 miles your friend does. So percents absolutely can be greater than 100%, just like a fraction can be greater than 1. So, well, 120, so that means 1 whole square is shaded. So this is 100. This is 100 out of 100. Now we need 20 more. So I'm going to shade 2 more columns. And this is 120 per 100, or out of 100. Okay. Now remember, 1 square is our unit. Okay, so we're not thinking of this as 120 out of 200. Our unit is 100 squares, so that's in the denominator. Okay. As a decimal, this is 1 whole square, which we'd write as 1, and this is 2/10, so it's 1.10. Our fraction out of 100, well, we wrote that here, it's 120 over 100. Now we can simplify this fraction. Noticing first they both end in 0, so I can divide the numerators and denominators by 10, and that's 12 out of 10. But notice both of these values are still even, so I'm going to divide by 2. So you don't always have to find the greatest common factor, as long as you know it's completely simplified in the end. And we have, this is equivalent to 6 over 5, or 6/5. So this is our simplified fraction. 6 and 5 have no common factors besides 1, so that's all set. And now as a percent, we can look at our fraction out of 100. Well, it's 120 per 100, so that's 120%. Okay. And you can think of with the decimal, it's 100 times larger than this decimal. Okay. So, or you could think this is the hundredths column, so it's 120 in the hundredths column, which is 120%.